Okay, here's our review for the test that we're going to have. So let's do the quiz ones. We'll do number 2 first, and then we'll go from there. All right, it says solve by completing the square. And I'll write that on here so we remember. Completing the square. All right, here it is. It's x squared plus 8x minus 5 equals 0. All right, so let's complete the square. I'm going to go through these a little bit faster than maybe I normally would, just because it's going to be recorded. You can go back and look at it, and I've taught this already before. So we're going to take this minus 5, put it to the other side. We're going to put a plus here and leave a blank, and when I put it onto the other side, it's going to be a plus 5 because I added 5 to both sides. I left this blank right here because I need to fill it in. I need to complete the square. And the way we do that is we take that middle coefficient, that 8. We do two things to it. First of all, we divide it by 2, and then we square it. So 8 divided by 2 is 4. 4 squared is 16. So that's what's going to go right here. So I put a plus 16 here. Remember, when you square, it's always going to be positive, so this number will always be positive. So I add a 16 to this side, and I add a 16 to the other side. Now this is a perfect square. So now I can write it like this. Put an x, always use this sign right here. That's the sign that's always going to go in the middle. And then you could look at it two ways. You could either take half of the 8 or you could take the square root of the 16. All right? You get the same number either way. So that would be a 4. Right? Because half of 8 is 4. Square root of 16 is also 4. That'll work every single time because of the way that we got this number. Right? We took half of it and squared it. So that's how we can find that number. All right, and that's just a 21. And now you got to get rid of this. Now this problem right here, or this at this point where we are right there, this is just like number 1 on the quiz. All right, some of you guys struggle with number 1 but got number 2. I don't get that. Maybe it's just you just didn't recognize what it was. Maybe that's what it probably was. So what do? You got to get rid of this squared. How do you get rid of a squared? You take the square root of both sides. And let's do this in one step. So I take the square root of both sides, put a plus or minus in front of it, and then I have to get rid of that plus 4, so I subtract a 4 from both sides. So here it is. It's x equals negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 21. And there's nothing else I can do with this. The square root of 21 I can't simplify because 7 times 3 is 21. I can't take the square root of 7. That's right, they're both prime. I can't take the square root of 7, can't take the square root of 3. And that's all I can do. I'm done. That's my answer. It's as simple as that. So that's one of the easier, probably the easiest, maybe, completing the square problem that you'll do. Maybe, I was going to say, well, if it came out to nice whole numbers, maybe that's a little easier, but to tell you the truth, I think this was a little easier. There's a little less math to do. You can just keep it in this form right here. Alright, so that's completing the square. Real basic, straightforward, completing the square problem. You should all be able to do that. Alright, hope that helped. Number 4. Let's see what that's all about. Oh, the cubic equation, all right. X cubed minus 27 equals 0. All right. First of all, you got to know what to do here. You can't just add a 27 to both sides. What you're going to have to do is you're going to have to factor this thing. And we learn in another chapter, in another test, how to factor a cubic, not equation, but what do you call those things? It's not an equation. Anyway. Well, this is a difference between two cubes, yes. But I was thinking of something else. I don't know. It'll come to me in a second. But anyway, you're absolutely right. This is a difference of two cubes. So when you look at this thing, there was a little formula that we learned how to do this. If you remember, I'll just review very briefly here. It looked like this. And it's that one where you go, for the signs, it's the same, the opposite, and it's always positive. So this is the same sign, this is the opposite sign, and this is always positive. And what goes here and here? A goes here, B goes here. A square goes here, B square goes here, and in the middle is AB. That's something that you have to memorize. If you have not memorized this, you haven't done enough. Right? You have to have this thing memorized. And now we got to transfer it over to this. So that's what we're going to use. Okay? We learned how to do this in the past. Now we have to figure out how that's going to be applied right here. Now remember, this is something cubed minus something cubed. Well, I've already got something cubed here. This x is being cubed. But what is being cubed to give you 27? 3, right. So it's 3 cubed. That's the b. Alright, so that's the first part you have to do before you even use this little formula right here. You have to understand that 27 is the same as 3 cubed. Now, if you take a look at this, every time you see an a in this little formula, you're going to put in an x. Every time you see a b in this formula, you're going to take this 3 right here and put it in for b. Alright, that's really all you have to do as far as the factoring part of this goes. So let's do that. Equals, put a couple parentheses. Alright, I've already got it written up here, but let's put the signs in here again. So it's same, which is negative, opposite, which is positive, and this last one's always going to be positive. So a and b go here. So x is the a and 3 is the b. A squared goes here, so that's x squared. B squared goes here. Remember the 3 is that b, so it's 3 squared, which is 9. Alright? And then a times b. Well, remember what the a is. It's x, and the b is 3, so x times 3 is 3x, so I just put a 3x right here. Alright? Now remember, actually I shouldn't put equals here. Let's do this. Let's put the equals over here. This is all equal to 0. I've got two parentheses that are set equal to be equal to 0. Did I say that right? I got two parentheses that are multiplied together that equal 0. That's probably how I should say it. So what we do is we take both of those parentheses and set them both equal to 0. So I take x minus 3, set it equal to 0. Then I take this whole thing right here, x squared plus 3x plus 9, and I set that equal to 0. And now I solve for x. So on this first problem right here, these are two completely different problems right here, okay? So I just take this x minus 3 equals 0, and I just solve for x. So x equals 3. So that's part of my answer. It's not my only answer. It's part of it. Now I got this stuff over here as well. So now I got to figure out how am I going to solve for this. You can choose any way that you want. All right? You could look to see if it factors, but does it factor? Is there anything that multiplies to be 9 that's going to add up to be 3? No, there's nothing that works there. So it's not going to factor real nice. So I got two other options. I could complete the square, like we just finished doing in the other problem, or I could do the quadratic formula. Which one? Do you have a preference? Formula? Okay. It seems like most people like the formula, so let's do the formula. I'll write it down. Negative b plus or minus. This is another thing that you have to have memorized. B squared minus 4ac. If you don't have this memorized, again, you haven't done enough. Over 2a. And notice, this is one little problem that I saw in the quiz, and I don't think I marked it wrong, and I probably could have. But notice, this whole entire thing is over 2a. Some of you guys are just taking that first part and putting it over 2a, or you're taking the second part and just putting your fraction right here and leaving this by itself. The whole entire thing needs to be over top of the fraction. So this fraction bar should stretch from the very beginning all the way to the very end. All right? And some of you guys see that on your quiz. I put a little red line on there to show that it extends all the way over. All right? Some teachers will be picky on that. I've seen them. Okay?
I just threw the yes was already negative. So.
Oh, right.
I put negative as well.
Right. Okay, so let's go ahead and do this. So x equals, let's solve for it. It's negative b. Well, b is positive 3, isn't it? So what's the opposite of b?
Never mind, I'm looking at the wrong
Yeah,
problem.
right. I think I do remember what you're talking about. Square root b squared, so 3 squared, which is 9, minus 4 times a. Now, I didn't write this down, but I usually do. Probably should have. Remember we write down what a, b, and c are equal to? So the a is 1, b is 3, and c is 9. After you get used to doing this, you probably don't need to go through all this. You can just look up here and see what your a, b, and c is. But if you want to, you could write it down like this. So anyway, minus 4ac. The a is 1, and the c is 9. Now watch, the whole thing, see that? That whole entire thing right there is over 2 times a. 2 times 1 is 2. And we simplify. So it's negative 3 plus or minus the square root. Let's see, that's what? 9 times 4 is 36. 9 minus 36 is negative 27, is that right?
Yep.
Over 2. We don't leave it like that. We always have to simplify. Okay, I'm not going to give you credit if you leave it like this. Even though it doesn't say that you have to simplify, I've told you from day one that you have to simplify these things. All right, so I will mark off if it's not simplified. So let's see what we get. Negative 3 plus or minus. What about this right there? First of all, I see a negative inside his square root. So what does that tell me? I'm going to have an I right there. Okay, so that takes care of that negative. But then I got to figure out what the square root of 27 is equal to. Well, let's break down 27. 9 times 3 is 27, isn't it? Then break that down. Square root of 9 is 3, right? That's going to be a 3. And then what's left over? The square root of 3. And that's all over 2. You could keep it like that if you want to make this 3i instead of I3. It might look a little bit better. And that would be your answer right there. So it's actually both of those things. I need to see this, and I need to see this. There's actually 3 answers, aren't there? There's negative 3 plus all this, and there's negative 3 minus all that. That's 2 answers. Then there's this. That's your third answer. Norval? You got it right. Let me see it. All right, let's take a look at number 5. Now, number 5, I said, remember I said I'd just give it to you? But if you got it right, I'll give you extra credit. I think only one person actually got it right. And we did almost the exact same problem yesterday, or the day before we took the quiz. All right, the letters are a little different, but it really was the same exact problem, to tell you the truth. So I was a little disappointed. I thought there would be more people get the extra credit. I gave you 2 points extra credit. I think Ashley got like what'd you get? 11 out of 10. That's not bad, is it? Get 11 points out of a possible 10. And she actually missed a problem too. But she got the extra credit, so that helped her out. I'm going to go through this kind of quick. Again, we did this the day before the quiz. I don't know. I can't remember if it was recorded or not, but I know we went over it. So let's see what we want to do. We want to. Oh, it doesn't just say solve. It says solve for t. Right. So you got to know what we're solving for, because there's 3 different letters here, aren't there? So you got to know which one you're solving for. So you're solving for t. Well, look at this. This t kind of looks like where the x would normally be, doesn't it? For instance, don't write this down, but doesn't this kind of look like this, like 3x squared minus 5x equals like 7? Doesn't it kind of look like that? Because the x is the same spot, right? This is just a number, this is just a number, and this is just a number. 3 different numbers. So it kind of looks like this. So if we had a situation like this, we should be able to solve for that, shouldn't we? Get the 7 on the left-hand side, set it equal to 0, throw it into the quadratic formula, and then solve for x. This is the exact same type of problem, except you just don't know that the r is 3 and the s is 5 and the k is 7. All right, but we have to solve for those. I'll tell you what, let's make that a different color, and let's make that a different color. All right, oops, the little, there we go. All right, well, I did it here again, sorry, a little particular. There we go. All right, so that thing in red right there is what you're trying to solve for. These other things are just your coefficients or your constants. So let's do this. Let's get this k over here on the left-hand side. So it's going to be r t squared minus st minus k equals 0. So we're going to put this into the quadratic formula. So we got to figure out what our a, b, and c are equal to. We did this in the last problem. So in this situation, what is our a? What is being multiplied by the variable squared? What is it? It's the r, isn't it? See, that's the a, that's the b, and that's the c. So a is equal to r. B, I shouldn't have just circled the s, but it's what? It's negative s, and the c is negative k. And we're just going to put that into the quadratic formula. I've written the quadratic formula down already. I'm not going to do it this time. Let's just plug this stuff in. It's negative b. Tiffany, I think that's what you were talking about, right? Yeah. It's negative b, which is the opposite of negative s. What's the opposite of negative s? It's positive s. Plus or minus square root of b squared. So if I take negative s and I square it, it comes out to a positive s squared. Because when I square negative, it comes out to be positive. Minus 4 times a, which is r, times c, which is negative k. And that whole thing, not just the square root part, the whole entire thing is over 2 times a, which is 2 times r. And we just clean it up a little bit and we're done. It's that easy. So it's s squared minus a negative is plus. Let's write it without all the parentheses. It's just 4rk. And that whole thing is over 2r. And we're finished. That's actually probably a little easier than having numbers in there, right? Because you don't have to worry about simplifying your radical or anything like that. You don't have to worry about actually multiplying things together and see if they simplify. That's it right there. Wouldn't you agree that's pretty easy? I think so. Yeah, we did this. We did this the day before we took the quiz. All right. Let's see what else. Oops. So that was the quiz. Let's do number 16 on review A first, and then we'll do the other ones. All right, I just forgot what I said. Was it number 10? 16. Oh, it was 10 on the other one, right? Oh, my memory's terrible. So we're doing 16 on the regular review, all right, the Part A review. Even though it doesn't say A on it, it was the first one I gave you, the one that I'm doing for credit. Okay, another completing the square problem. We just did one, so let's do another one. We'll do it kind of quick. And it says solve by completing the square. And on the test, it will tell you to solve it certain ways. Okay, solve it by completing the square, solve it by using the quadratic formula, solve it maybe by factoring. Okay, you might have to do some by factoring. I don't think it says it on here, but I think, if I remember right, maybe on the quiz, you do have to know how to factor a little bit. All right, so, or the test. Let's take a look at this. We're going to do this by completing the square, so I'm going to take this, chuck it to the other side, and leave that blank. Remember, we always put a plus there, leave a blank, take this to the other side, so we add a 5 to both sides. Is this the same exact problem as we did? It's the same exact one, isn't it? You can do it one more time just for fun? Let's do it real quick. So it's t squared plus 8t plus, half of this is 4, you square it, and it's 16. Okay? 5 plus 16 is 21, right? And then it's a perfect square, so it's t plus 4 equals 21. And at this point, you can do this in your head, can't you? It's negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 21. Yeah, it's the same exact problem we did earlier on the quiz. All right, well, that was easy.
No, this one has an X and this one has a T.
Ah, so it's not exactly the same. Okay, well, you caught me. What else are we doing? Number 10 from the other one, right? From the Part B. I remember a 10 being on there. Do you remember? All right, so this is from review Part B. I to the 98th power. Wow. Well, what do we know about this I stuff? We know that I squared is what? Negative 1. And we know that I to the 4th, and that's the one we're really going to key on, is what?
1.
It's positive 1. Good. So those right there, if you know those two, that really helps with this. Let's take a look at 98. Is 98 divisible by 4? Because anytime we have an exponent that's divisible by 4, it's going to come out to a 1. Is 98 divisible by 4? I don't think it is, because half of it is 49. You can't take half of 49, so it's not. So you got to go down a little bit. So what's the next lowest number from 98 that's divisible by 4? 96. That's right. So it's 96. But this still has to equal I to the 98th. So I to the 96 times what? I to the squared, second, right? I to the second. Do you agree with that? Isn't that the same as I to the 98th? Why in the world did I make it I to the 96? Because I'm looking for a multiple of 4. I want I to some multiple of 4. Because anytime I get I to a multiple of 4, right? 4, 8, 12, 16, anything like that, it's going to come out to be a positive 1. 230? Okay. So it's going to come out to be a positive 1. Everybody okay with that? So watch how easy it is now. Once that's the work. That's the hardest part of the job right there. I to the 96 is just going to come out to be a 1. So really it just cancels out, doesn't it? Right? Because it's just 1 times this. Well, what's I squared? We just said what I squared was. We should know that already. It's negative 1. So I to the 98th is just a negative 1. And that's all you do. You just look to see if this number is divisible by 4. If it's not, you go backwards until you get the next number that's divisible by 4. Figure out what's going to be left over, and then go from there. Okay? Because I to the 4th is 1, I to the 8th is 1, I to the 12th, I to the 16th, I to the 20th, I to the 24th. Anything that's a multiple of 4 for my exponent will always come out to be a positive 1. And why is I to the 4th 1? Well, because I squared times I squared, what's I squared? It's negative 1. What's this I squared? That's also negative 1. What's negative 1 times negative 1? Positive 1. Would you agree? So I to the 4th is positive 1. I just don't want to sit here and do this, 49 times, right? I squared, I squared, I squared, I squared, 40, I could do that, but that would be silly. So what I do is I say, okay, I've noticed that every multiple of 4 for my exponent will always come out to be a positive 1. It's that repeating pattern, that constantly repeats. It's kind of redundant, isn't it? Because a pattern repeats anyway, so if I said a pattern that repeats. Anyway. Yes?
What was I of first and was I correct?
I the first is just I.
Yeah, and side of third.
Well, figure it out. Watch. What's I to the 3rd? It's I squared times what? Times I, isn't it? Alright, so if you don't have I to the 3rd memorized, it's no big deal. Really, this is all you have to have memorized right there. That's the only one you have to have memorized. The rest you can figure it out. Because I cubed is I squared times I to the 1st. So I squared is negative 1. Then I to the 1st is just an I. What's negative 1 times I? It's just negative I. So if you want to memorize it, you can. And that's fine to memorize that I cubed is negative I. But you can always get to it, can't you? All right, if you don't have it memorized. And I to the 1st is just I. Because I to the 96 is a multiple of 4. 4 divides into 96. All right, so anytime you have I to a multiple of 4, it's a 1. All right, what's that? 11 on this same thing? That's the same kind of problem? Yeah, 43rd? Okay. So I to the 43rd. Well, let's think about that. First of all, is 43 divisible by 4? No. Let's not go up. I always like to go down on this, okay? So watch. What about 42? No, because if you take half of 42 is 21. You can't take half of that, so you know it's not divisible by 4, okay? What about 41? Obviously not. What about 40? Yeah, absolutely. So that I to the 40th, how am I going to write it, though? I to the 40th times what? I to the 3rd, right? And why did I keep going down to 40? Because I want a multiple of 4. 43 is not a multiple of 4. 42 is not. 41 is not. And what's the next one down that's a multiple of 4? 40. So what do I do with that I to the 40? Anytime I is to a multiple of 4, what can I do with it? It's a 1, isn't it? All right, now we say cancel out. We cross it out and stuff. But you got to realize it is a 1. It's a number 1. It's not I to the 1st. It's the number 1, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's a 1. 1 times I cubed. So we got to figure out what I cubed is now. We just did it a second ago. You could have it memorized, but if you don't have it memorized, you could go through this step, and so your answer is negative I. So I to the 43rd power is just the same thing as just plain old negative I. Remember, they just keep repeating. It's cyclical. It just keeps on going around and around. Every 4, it goes back to where it started. Okay? Got about 10 minutes. Anything else? Now's the time to ask. On which one? The first one? B? Okay. Alright, this is still from B, number 17. And it says, solve by completing the square. Okay, this is a little tougher completing the square than what we've been doing. Well, we've only really done one, haven't we? So this is a good one to do. Alright. First thing I do is I look at this. You may not even... Well, we'll just do it like this. I have to get rid of this coefficient in front of my t squared. How do I get rid of that? Divide it. Divide this by 4, by 4, by 4. And we do the right side by 4 as well. Even though it still comes out to 0, we still divide it by 4. So let's see what happens. And the reason I do that, when I complete the square, this coefficient needs to be a 1. In order for this completing the square thing to work, I want a 1 in front of this t squared. How do I do that? I get rid of the 4 by dividing a 4. Okay? So that cancels out. So I've got t squared plus, let's see what this does. 2 goes into both of those, right? 9 times, so really it's just 9 over 2t. Everybody see that? Don't write it as a decimal. By no means write it as a decimal. And what happens here? 2 goes into that twice, 2 goes into that 3 times, so it's minus 3 over 2 equals 0. Alright, so that's how we started off. Now we're set up to do completing the square, because now my coefficient is a 1. And that's what I want when I do this. Well, this is not a perfect square, so I take this, chuck it to the other side, and let's see what we get. So it's t squared plus 9 over 2t plus blank, remember we'll leave that blank there, equals, and I add a 3/2 to both sides, so it becomes a positive 3/2. Now I got to fill in that blank. This is what they mean by completing the square. This is what I'm doing when I complete the square. Now this is a little more difficult than the other one. Remember the other one, the middle number was an 8. We went 8 divided by 2, which is 4, squared at 16. That was a piece of cake. This one's a little bit tougher. Not a whole lot, but a little bit. So what do we do with that middle coefficient? What do we do first? We do two things. What's the first thing? Divided by 2, or take half of it. Since it's a fraction, I don't like to put over 2, so I'd say times 1/2. Alright, but that's what we're doing, isn't it? Dividing by 2. And then I take that and I square it. So let's see what this is. This is what? 9/4 squared. And when I square 9/4, I get 81 over 16. Let's move this out of the way because I need the room. Whoops. There we go. Alright. So it's 81 over 16. What do I do with that 81 over 16? Well, I add it to both sides. 81 over 16. Now by doing that, that made this thing into a perfect square. But I can't just add it to the left side. I also have to add it to the right side. Now let's look over here on the left-hand side. Well, I'll tell you what. Let's do this first. Let's add these fractions together. And this is probably, for a lot of you guys, this is the toughest part of the whole thing because you have to find a common denominator. So let's find the denominator. But it's so easy. Watch, I got a 2 and a 16. What's my common denominator with 2 and 16? It's just 16, right. 2 times what? 8. So 3 times 8. 3 times 8 is 24. Okay, I didn't have to do anything to this one, right? It's already 16, so I just keep that in 81. Everybody with me? Go back and look. It's just finding common denominator. We did that back in 4th and 5th grade. Alright, here we go. Let's do the completing the square part. This is a perfect square, so I go t plus, remember it's always that sign right there. How do I find this? I could either take half of this one or the square root of that. Either way, I'm going to get what? 9/4 equals, now what's this going to be? It's going to be what, 106, is that right? 5? Why did I say 6? 4 and 1 is 5. 105, very good. 105 over 16. Alright? We're getting there. Oh, this is squared. Don't forget that. That's important. Now what do we do? Get rid of the square root, right? Or the square by square rooting it. So that gets rid of this, and then we come over here and we square root this. Put a plus or minus in front of it. Then we'll subtract a 9/4. So here we go. It's negative 9/4 plus or minus square root of 105. Does anything go into that? Well, 5 does. What's that? That's 21, right? Is that right? 105 divided by 5. So I've got 5 and I got 21, which is a 3 times 7. So can I take the square root of anything in there? Can I combine anything? Nope. So the square root of 105 is good to go. It's just the square root of 105. But I can take the square root of the denominator, right? Because I'm taking the square root of the top and I'm taking the square root of the bottom. What's the square root of 16? It's just 4. And if you want to leave it like that, it's perfectly fine. It's probably how they left it in the answer key. Remember, this is one of the ones where I gave you the answer key. All right? Is that what your answer looked like? Yep, exactly like that. And that's how you do that. That was probably the most difficult completing the square that you'll see. Something that looks like that. I don't know, maybe there's one that might come out with an I in there or something. It might, it adds a little bit of difficulty to it, but But there you go. But really, what was really that hard about it? What was the hardest thing? Dividing by 4, that was a piece of cake, wasn't it? What was hard about this? Maybe taking half of this and squaring it. But really, was it that hard taking half of 9/2? I don't think so. Was it that hard to square it? What was the hardest part? My guess is, for you guys, you probably figured that just adding these two fractions together was the hardest part. But really, was that difficult? Have a fraction with 2 and 16? Nah, not really. And then you squared that. Then you had to take the square to the top and the bottom. And that was kind of easy because you can't take the square root of 105. Square root of 16 you can. It's just a plain old 4. So if you really look at this stuff, I don't think it was that bad at all. Do we have time to do one more? If it's a rather short one, we could. Anybody else? That's it? Don't want to squeeze one in there at the last second? All right. Okay, that's it. It's recorded. All right, I'll put it up on YouTube, so watch it. If I went a little fast, if you didn't quite get all this stuff, go through it yourself. That's what you have to do. You know how you study for math? People say all the time, how in the world do you study for a math test? Well, you do problems. That's how you study. You don't just sit there and read the book. You don't just sit there and read your notes. You actually physically write, and you do problems. If you're not actually doing practice problems to review for a test, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. All right, you need to do problems. So that's what you have to do. So test tomorrow. It's over this stuff right here. Make sure that you can do it within the time frame. All right, that's part of taking a test, is finishing a test within the time frame that I allow. So we'll start right away. I'll collect, I guess that's the only thing I'm collecting, right? It's just that 2, 1 to 2, 4. Yeah. So I'm collecting that worksheet 2, 1 to 2, 4. The part B I'm not collecting. You can just keep that for yourself. Okay, I just gave it to you for some extra problems to practice. But I will collect that original 2, 1 to 2, 4 review test. Everybody got it? Okay, that's it. Have fun studying for this.